I'm Roisin Markham. So I'm based in a village very similar to this village over in North Wexford. And I'm really fascinated that Doughnut has such an amazing event like this. And I think it's really inspiring. So thanks a million to Keith for the invitation to come and talk. Getting ahead of myself and my slides. Right, so the topic of this talk is, can Doughnut live in the donut? So I just want to say welcome to everybody's talk. Thanks for coming. I'd just like to see a show of hands to see who lives in Doughnut. Okay, great. Who's travelled about, within 20 kilometres away? Okay, interesting. And who's travelled over 80 kilometres? Cool. Okay, great. Thanks a million. And then I'm also curious to know who in the audience knows a little bit about doughnut economics. So keep your hands up if you've heard of doughnut economics. Right. Keep your hands up if you could explain it to somebody. Okay, well, here we go. Okay, great. That's brilliant to see. Thanks a million. It just gives me a little bit of an indication as to who's in the audience, and I'll be talking to you later about who's been curious. And then last question before I kick off is, who's coming to the workshop on the beach at 4:30? Excellent. Okay, great stuff. Brilliant. So I'm here today to ask, can Doughnut live in the donut? And what I'm going to do in the time that we have together is I'm going to talk a little bit about doughnut economics and explain it. So doughnut economics is understood as this particular graphic here, which has two circles. So in the donut, you have the outer ecological circle, and then in the center, you have the social foundation. And the space between both of those foundations is the safe, just space for humanity. And that green space, and I swear I didn't color coordinate my dress to resemble that, but that just space in between those two circles is where we need to live. And we're currently, humanity is overshooting that in a significant way. We're falling short of people in the social foundation, and we're overshooting the planetary boundaries. So I'll talk a little bit more about this later. But the other part of doughnut economics that we probably don't talk enough about is the 7 ways to think like doughnut, to think like a 21st century economist. So they are: change the goal, move away from consistent growth because that's not sustainable, into 21st century economics based on something like the donut. See the big picture. Move from a self-contained market to an embedded economy. Nurture human nature. So instead of thinking about rational economic man, think about social adaptable humans, not the I, the we. The 4th one is get savvy with systems. So move from mechanical equilibrium to dynamic complexity and understand more about how systems work together. And then number 5 is designed to distribute. So there's this theory that growth will even out. It doesn't. The economics show that it doesn't. And then the solution for that is to be distributive by design. The 6th one is create to regenerate. So growth will clean it up again. It doesn't. The economics shows that it doesn't. And so we need to be regenerative by design. And again, I'll talk a little bit more about this. And the 7th one is be agnostic about growth. So instead of being growth addicted, that everything must grow, we need to have growth, and how we achieve that, to be agnostic as a community about growth. So I'm here today because in 2020, I started a conversation nationally about doughnut economics. You'll hear me talk about IDEN, which is the Irish Doughnut Economics Network, and DEAL, which is the Doughnut Economics Action Lab. So in 2020, Kate Rayworth and her co-founder set up DEAL as a way to bring doughnut economics into action. And I started a national conversation. It was just before COVID hit. And we ended up having a weekly Zoom call during the first year and a half of COVID. Every week, people around Ireland meeting to have conversations about doughnut economics. And you'll see that diagram of where we started and where it grew to within a year and a half. I haven't updated that. I'm hoping that Doughnut will have a couple of blue tags in that after this weekend. So IDEN is a network. I'm the founder and network steward. And we operate and work under the principles of the Doughnut Economics Action Lab. So we come together on a monthly basis now via Zoom, and then we support and encourage people around Ireland to get into action through Doughnut Economics and tools and the kind of workshop we're going to run on the beach as well. At the end of the talk, I'll show you a video of us at Iden at a movement lab we started last year in Imma at the first Eco Arts Festival that Imma ran. So it's about bringing the Doughnut local. So the other thing I'd love to hear from the audience is, what do you love about Doughnut? Why do you live here? Why do you come here? Does anybody like to share what they love about Doughnut? Or why you live here? Land and sea, lovely. Anybody else? So that was beauty on the beach. Max Cafe, and going for a swim, I heard, after, and then going to the cafe afterwards. Lovely, lovely. Anybody else? Beach, playground, right beside, very handy, right there. Anybody else? Why you come and visit Doughnut even? The cycleway, amazing. Accessibility, right? Fantastic. Okay, thank you. So, Happy Earth Day. Today is Earth Day. So along with Happy Earth Day, we need to think about how we can be in that green space, the safe and just space for humanity. So the inside of the social foundation includes things like water, income, education, resilience, voice, jobs, energy, social equity, gender equality, health, and food. They're the things that we need for a good life. In the Irish context, we might put in housing. We might also put in public voice. So these are the things we need to live a good life. But who tells us what a good life is? So in Doughnut, I hear a good life is the land and the sea, being able to go for a swim and then being able to go for a coffee, right? But in what way are people in Doughnut and Kerry falling short in that social foundation? And then as we look in that safe space for humanity and we look at the outside elements that we're overshooting, we've got ecological challenges. We've got climate change, freshwater uses, nitrogen and phosphate cycles. We have ocean acidification, chemical pollution, atmospheric aerosol loading, ozone depletion, biodiversity loss, and land use change. So this is how we started the 21st century. So financial meltdown, climate breakdown, and COVID lockdown. And we don't live in our isolated communities. We're all connected. I mean, when you're in the sea, I don't know, when I swim in the sea, sometimes I think about the fact that when you're in the sea, you're connected to all the other seas around the world. Does anybody else think about that when they're in the sea? And that idea that, you know, I don't know if any of you sat in on the talk earlier, but the whales and the dolphins they showed, that even if I can't see them, that in some way I'm connected to them through the water. And through the water that I'm in, where I live in Wexford, we're connected just by around the coastline. Through each particle of water, we're still connected. So it's this idea that although things happen very far away, they're still connected. We mightn't feel they're connected, but they are connected through the Earth systems and through our social and economic systems. So yesterday, I don't know if you were here for the opening, but Mary Kieran, who lives across the water, made a comment about the fact that yesterday was Ireland's Earth Overshoot Day. So that means every single day for the rest of the year, anyone living in Ireland is living beyond the means of what Ireland has in terms of the earth and in terms of our natural resources. So for Ireland to live, we would need 3 Earths. And as of yesterday, we're living beyond our means from an ecological perspective. And that's quite a shocking statistic. So humanity is living far out of balance. And sometimes when you're standing like on the beach or you're standing having a coffee looking out at that gorgeous landscape, the mountains and the sea, it can be hard to think about these things, but these are the hard realities we're facing right now. So National Doughnut. This is on information based about 10 years old now, but it was developed by Leeds University. So you'll see that Malawi and typically Southern Hemisphere countries have very little they overshoot in terms of the outer foundation, but are deeply falling short of the social foundation in the middle. Whereas in contrast, Ireland looks like it's a very strong social foundation, but it completely overshoots in the ecological boundary. And countries like Norway, who perform in the top 1 to 3% of countries around the globe for happiness index and living well index, but look at how much they overshoot out past the ecological boundary. And it's no longer acceptable in this day and age to say we have a good life if we're exceeding our ecological boundaries in this way. I'd challenge that. I'd challenge the parameters in how we think about our societies and our systems. And obviously, I'm not the only one, because Kate Raworth wrote a book about this about 8 years ago, and she has set up a whole system around this. But there's a lot of people gathering. There's people all over the globe connecting through the Deal Action Lab and getting into action in their countries. Since 2015, Wales has been running its government through Doughnut Economics. They have a fantastic model. They're our closest neighbours on the continent of Europe and in the UK. Costa Rica has transformed their society through a Doughnut economic model also. So this is 20th century economics. This first image here is what, when you go to study economics, that's the first image you see. That's what they still teach in our Leaving Cert syllabus and in our third level colleges. This is what we're teaching people about economics. We're teaching them that rational man is at the top, is the apex predator, and that's the human selfie of the world, right? That's not our reality. We've placed ourselves at the top of that system. And one of the challenges I have, that humans are not at the top of the system. We need to move ourselves a little bit over to the left and down a bit to be part of the system, not the full system. And then we're in GDP. We're focused on GDP and on growth. But that's last century economics. We need a new challenge, and we need a new way to think about it. So again, Mary last night in the opening made a really interesting point that we talked about as consumers. But we're not just consumers and producers and workers and owners, right? We're not the market. We are more than that. The economy was originally the household. So in the household, we are parents, partners, relatives, children, we are guardians, we are connected, we are neighbours. In the state, we are public, we are servants, we're residents, we're voters, we're protesters, but we may also be homeless. And in the commons, so if we think about our communities as the commons, we are volunteers, sharer, coordinators, stewards. Or if we think about the sea as the commons, we're bathers, we're swimmers, we're dippers, we're paddlers. So can humanity, and you can read Fenit here, where you see humanity, think of it as Fenit as well. So can Fenit get into the donut? Can it be distributive by design and regenerative by design? So how can we get into the donut? So right now, most of our businesses and most of the economy is linear. It's extract, it's take, it's make, it's waste, right? We're in a linear system. We take out from the earth, whether it's a vegetable or whether it's a rock mineral or lithium for an electric car or your mobile phone, whatever that is. We take it out of the earth, we put it through a manufacturing process, or we process it into canned or tinned processed food, whatever it is. We put it on a shelf somewhere, or we park it in a car sales plot, and we sell it. And all of the systems that has to go through to create a product that is offered to the consumer, for the consumer to buy, use it, resell it sometimes, and other times throw it in the waste bin where it goes to landfill. We've got to change that system. There's a lot of talk about circular economy, but the models that are being established right now, and in Ireland as well, are not truly circular. So we've got to change what we consider waste. Our bins should all be called other materials for a new lifestyle. It's too long, right? We need an acronym. But that acronym should not be waste bin. What we throw out in our kitchens or in our restaurants, what's happening to that? Where does that go? The waste that we generate, the clothes that we stop wearing. Ireland has a good reputation of donating clothes, but most of the clothes that we donate go to landfill or go to an African country where they end up not being used because the quality is poor, or for whatever reasons. I've seen photographs of mountains of clothes in Ghana, the way the EU used to have butter mountains. That's not regenerative. We've got to stop exporting our waste, and we've got to start considering how the things that we create and use in our towns and villages, what we can do with those things and how we make a truly regenerative cycle. So the biological materials and the technical materials as well. So regenerative by design. So these are kind of interesting when you're talking about a village, right? Some of these, when you look at Sponge City in Kunai, this is a fantastic model where they've taken a city and they've brought nature right into the city. They've greened the city, they've transformed it. They transformed their waterway there to be a living, breathing space where it was 10, 20 years ago dead. But when you look at Phoenix and you look at what you've done, you've actually brought a Tarmacadam pathway on top of old tracks from Tralee into Phoenix to make it accessible from an active travel point of view, which is amazing. Circular construction. So Amsterdam, during the first year of COVID, announced that it was going to use the Doughnut economics model as its recovery program to get out of COVID. And Amsterdam has done a fantastic job, starting with their planning and their construction of dramatically changing their city. So they have a circular economy based in Amsterdam, but it's done through the model of Doughnut economics, really worth looking at from the contextual, not just of our local villages and towns, but from a municipality point of view and how we plan things in Ireland. Cement, concrete, huge ecological footprint, massive. How do you change that? How do we account for what we take out, how we measure that, how we manage that, and how it gets used in a different way that's more supportive to nature and to the footprint that we create around planning and building and construction? How can humanity get into the Doughnut? Move from divisive. So capturing an opportunity in a capitalist and consumer way where what we take from an extractive point of view stays in the hands of a few and many are left without anything and falling short of the social foundation. How can we move to being more distributive and a sharing opportunity and value with all who co-create it? So the coffee that we drank this morning, that coffee cup and the delicious coffee flavour that's in it if you drink coffee, right? Who picked that coffee? Where did it come from? How do we know that the person who picked that as a farmer, as a worker, gets valued and gets a socially just and ethical pay for our ability to drink a cup of coffee every morning, twice a day, 3 times a day, 4 times a week, whatever it is? Do we think about that? How do we think about that in Phoenix in the morning after a swim when we're having a delicious cup of coffee down the road? And how do we think about that co-creating of that value, even in the village in Phoenix? So again, these are examples of changing public spaces in Bogota. It's really interesting during COVID. It was fascinating to see that county councils and local town councils were changing car parking spaces in places like Naas to make them more friendly so people could sit outside. We now have a sitting outside culture in Ireland where we didn't have one before. We might have 4 coats on and a blanket on, but we can sit outside now in a way that we've reclaimed car parking spaces for humans and other beings like plants and animals and birds to enjoy as well. So also another thing that's happened in the last 3 years is that the Irish government has a universal basic income test pilot going on with artists at the moment. Are you aware of that? And that's a phenomenal achievement. So the Universal Basic Income Group in Ireland has been championing that for over 20 years. So it's fantastic to see that get traction. So 21st century economics. The first image that we should be showing is this new embedded economy model, which talks about solar energy coming in, the market, the household, the state, communities, and what we get out of that, and how we use all of those different elements of what we can get from the sun, both in terms of nourishing plants in the ground and in terms of energy. How do we make them community assets rather than private or personal assets? The selfie. Not I, not me, not rational man, we as a community. And the goal, get inside the donut, the safe, just space for humanity, leaving nobody short of the space in the centre and trying to pull in our ecological impacts and overshoot. So yesterday on the way down in the car, my husband was driving. I swear I wasn't on Twitter and driving at the same time. Don't believe in that. My husband was driving. Thank you, Sinton. And the Deal Action Lab actually have released this week, and I share it on a slide later, but they've released a pathway for local places to get into the donut. And the journey for any place aiming to live within the donut starts with the ambition of this question. How can Doughnut be a home to thriving people in a thriving place while respecting the well-being of all people and the health of the whole planet? So what I'd suggest is that we think actually about, can Doughnut not just live in the donut, can Doughnut thrive in the donut? And how, as people who live here or journey here, how do we think about that? Donut economics is an invitation to think differently, to get into action differently. So, how can all of Doughnut be as generous as wild nature? How can all the people of Doughnut thrive? How can Doughnut respect the health of the whole planet? And how can Doughnut respect the well-being of all people? I was fascinated. I was trying to find photographs of Doughnut online for the talk in the last 2 weeks. And most of the photographs online about Doughnut are of how beautiful it is, with very little people in it. And I was like, there's definitely people living in the village in Doughnut. There definitely are. And it's fantastic to see people in and around today and the place be busy and thriving and full of life, right? But how do you take that energy and how do you answer these questions in a place like Doughnut? So you start by unrolling the donut. So you take the donut and you unroll it and you talk about the ecological ceiling and the social foundation in terms of local and global and in terms of social and ecological. And these are workshops, continuing workshops, and that you can do to start talking about and asking questions. All this information is up in the comments on the Doughnut Economics Action Lab. It's all freely available. Anybody can start using it. Anybody can start working with it. So I'm sharing this case study from Civic Square in Birmingham. So people are in scale of Doughnut economics all over the globe, as I mentioned, from both islands like Costa Rica, countries like Wales, Amsterdam, Belgium. Cornwall has a very interesting model that they use for civic decision making. Devon has a very interesting business model as well. Melbourne has a fantastic regenerative business or regenerative donut. But in terms of Irish villages, the most interesting one I've seen in the last few years is Civic Square in Birmingham. So they have scaled the donut right down to a neighbourhood. And the neighbourhood is probably the size of this space at the Greenway that they're talking about, that the Civic Square is. Now, obviously, it's a wider population. And they've spent the last 2 years doing explorations, started in COVID, where this was set up in like a tube, not a tube station, but like a bus station. And they put up these boards and they just started asking questions and having people interact with them. And they've developed their own neighbourhood donut and toolkit. And so I'll make sure these slides are available afterwards and you can look at them more closely in more detail. I'm not expecting you to be able to read them. But they basically did the research, have spent the last number of years connecting with people locally, getting into action, really understanding what it means for their place to live in the donut. What is the donut for them? And they've basically developed their own neighbourhood donut. This is their local donut. This is how much they overshoot the ecological ceiling and how much they undershoot in their social foundation. It's quite a deprived area in Birmingham. And they've engaged with all different communities. They've done biodiversity walks where they've had experts and just local people who have local knowledge. And they've taken people out in rain and sunshine and sleet and hail as well. It's a fantastic piece of work and definitely worth a closer look at. But what they now have is they have a way of which they're creating future projects using donut economics as the core to make civic decisions, to run projects, and as a foundation for how they develop and have a vision for their future. So these are the 9 pathways that Doughnut Economics has just launched. So the invitation today is that Doughnut might think about how it uses this pathway, taking steps on the journey, committing long term. So you might consider that here today, you being in this room is step 1. So my question is, can Doughnut get into the Doughnut, and are you willing to go on that journey? So there's a workshop on the beach. Hopefully I think the weather will be grand for it. What do you think? We'll go out on the beach and we're going to do a step into the Doughnut workshop. I'm going to show a short video to give you an idea. And if anybody who's here that you'd like to come along to the beach and you haven't signed into it, just come down. We're going to start that at 4:30 on the beach. This workshop is to introduce you to the concept of Doughnut Economics, which allow us to step into the Doughnut, to understand it at a deeper level, a more physical level.
So at the heart of Doughnut Economics is this visual called the Doughnut, which recognises the limits of the planet as an ecological ceiling that Earth system scientists have defined. At the same time, we don't want to be falling short on the essentials of life, so we have a social foundation, recognising all the things we need to live a good life. And so we want to meet the needs of all, within the means of the living planet.
In the workshop, we ask the participants 3 questions. So we ask people to think about the outer boundary of the Doughnut, the space of ecological overshoot, and to share with the other person a natural place that they love and hope to never lose. And then we go on to ask a second question, which is think about the inner boundary of the Doughnut and the hole in the middle, the space of social shortfall, and to share with the other person something that's enabled them to be here and that they're grateful for, that others might not have. And then lastly, we ask people to think about the space of the Doughnut and to share with the other person a gift that they bring that could help their community or humanity, or indeed the wider society, to get into the Doughnut.
I thought the workshops were great. The play and the fun and the moving people along a process, I think it was very successful.
It was a good way to visualize these concepts, and it was nice to have the physical aspect of embodying these different ideas.
We really begin to shift ideas into our body and connect them with each other, realise we're interconnected in what we care about, and it opens people up. It lands in their body in a different way, and that has lasting impact.
So thanks very much for listening. And if anybody's any questions. Hi.
Thanks very much. If for the Doughnut to work, do we need to move away from the economic, like we need to put value on other things other than just capital and money and that?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, we need a new economic system.
And how could that happen?
It happens. So in the last 50 years, we've been convinced that economics is not for us. By the way, I'm not an economist, just to be really clear about that, right? Don't ask me economic questions except about this. So we've been convinced that economics are owned by someone else. But the real meaning of economics began as a household economy. So we've got to reclaim economics and redraw economies and what they mean for us in our place, in our local place. And we have to work with the county councils and with other people in the places we live, work, play and learn to create a new economy that brings us inside those ecologically boundaries and pull up the social shortfall. Now that's a big highbrow ambition, right? The reality is, on the nitty-gritty of it, we need to get into action about exploring the deeper meaning of what each of those things are and what's important to us in places like Doughnut or the place that you've come from or where you live. Does that make sense? Go on, you have another question. I saw it.
Sorry. Yeah. Well, it just seems that if we're working on the local scale, but enough, like we're obviously globalized type of world. I mean, everything we eat and consume often comes from external, or we have to travel for work, or even if to address some of the social issues, then that would require, let's say, more taxation on a national scale. I'm just curious to see how, the kind of local interacts with the global and the national.
I love that you have used the word curious, because that's the invitation with Doughnut Economics, is to get more curious. Look at different models, look how different people are using it, and then start making spaces where you start having those conversations. Like now when I go food shopping, I can't just buy things. I have to look at what the air miles are. I think about, I never buy French beans that come from wherever they come from, right? I've started to buy much more seasonally. I'll actually, I've tried to take plastic out of my shopping. I've tried to see if I can buy things locally produced that limit the impact on the ecological overshoot, and that are ethically produced as well. And so that if we're paying for something that's cheap, somebody else is paying for that. It's not just cheap at that face value. Carrots for 39 pence a bag. That's cheap food. Food isn't cheap to produce. So who's ultimately paying for that? And where's that extraction and that reduction of cost in that process? So for me, my invitation back to you is to get curious, find out more, get a group together, start exploring it, and start seeing where you can bring some of these ideas local. So West Cork has a Doughnut economy group, and one of the villages, Ballydehob, has its own donut. And so they've started with things like biodiversity. They've started with things like products in one of the social projects they have. They've gone in, they've done an audit of all the things they buy, even to keep the place clean. And they've said, well, if you buy this, these are the implications of this product. Can we find a different, more sustainable or appropriate solution for cleaning this building? And just even simply starting in some of those spaces starts. And what happens is then you begin changing the conversation. Does that help? Does that answer your question? Thanks. Thank you for the questions. Anybody else? Who came up? So it's Kate Rayworth. So she was working for Oxfam at the time, and she wrote the book, Doughnut Economics and How to Think Like a 21st Century Economist. Well, I'm hearing Fiona talking about it. Yeah, around the country. So there are pockets of it. And I regularly have conversations with people. So Ballinas's trying to get into the donut. I'm trying to start a donut in North Wexford. Wexford is trying to get it, or Wicklow is trying to get into the donut. There are pockets happening where there are donutty projects happening around the country. But it's very interesting to look at Deal has set up the website, the community-based website, so that you can read stories and look at tools. And that's well worth having a look at the depth and breadth of what they've done since 2020. So they're making it more visible. I'm going to go here and then I'm going to go there. Sorry, okay, we'll go there and then here and then
Lovely. Thanks a million. That was a really thought-provoking presentation. I suppose my question really is about, have we yet, I don't know how old the idea is, but do we yet have any evidence of impact? Is it making a difference? Not alone in terms of the individual choices that people make, I get that bit, but in terms of buy-in by whole communities and, ultimately the sort of balance of the social, the economic and the environmental impact. I'm just wondering if there's any evidence-based.
Yeah, absolutely. And Wales is a great example. And the reason I use Wales is I think it's really interesting that in 2015, that's a good while ago, right? Wales adopted Doughnut Economics as the model for their development at a municipality, like at a governmental level, right? And they've just reviewed it in the last 2 years. So they have the evidence as close. But what they also did in 2015 is they introduced a law that you couldn't do anything in Wales unless you questioned if it was going to have a negative impact on the future generations. So they introduced both of those things in 2015 in Wales. But again, the container for all of those stories is the Doughnut Economics Action Lab website. But again, look at Costa Rica. I'm starting to hear in the global media how well Costa Rica has turned around its economy. But 3 years ago, I remember being on calls where Kate Rayworth was speaking to people very high in Costa Rica in their government, and they were sharing what they were doing, and they were starting that model. So there have been people, Amsterdam has been thinking about this much longer than when COVID hit. They were in action about 2 years before that. Belgium has looked at it. Brussels has looked at it. I've mentioned Melbourne already. There's some, so if you're talking scale, you can look at the country level, you can look at an island level, you can look at a city level, and you can also look, as I said, Civic Square is a really good example of a neighborhood or small village level. So there are examples, and we are seeing evidence that it is changing. Thank you for the question. We'll go here and then to this gentleman in the hat.
You more or less answered my question there, really. Because what I was going to suggest is that you actually tell us how Wales on a governmental level employed it, and then how a very small community group can use it. But so you've answered the question, but where can people find the examples? Can you tell them where?
You're on that. So if you go to Doughnut Economics Action Lab, it's referred to as DEAL. I'll make sure that there are links, and we'll share out the links, and I'll make sure, Keith, I don't know if you can support that in the Wild Minds website. So I'll make sure that they're shared. And basically, how long have you got? My husband will tell you I can talk about this stuff for about 2 years. When I started connecting deeper with the Doughnut, I did a lot of research and a lot of reading. In the last year and a half, I haven't had so much time to give to that. There's a lot of information out there. So if you can't find it, again, you can ask Mary, you can ask me, you can come you can join Doughnut Economic Lab's open forums where they bring people together from all over the world to share that knowledge. And people are very generous because it's built and it's designed through the models of Doughnut Economics. People share in the comments, and it's regenerative and distributive, and there's a lot of sharing of information. So you can find that information just behind you there. He's taken off his hat now. Hey,
just like to ask your advice. Well, would FENIT be a little on the small side for a Doughnut project? Would it be better, would it like critical mass? You mentioned West Cork, they have the Fuchsia project and all down there, their own brand. Would it be better to extend it along the Greenway and connect to Tralee? Would you have more options for a start? You could break it up afterwards, then into smaller doughnuts.
So I think that's a really interesting question. I think it depends who wants to start the conversation and where you're at. So I would say nothing is too small. I've seen people apply the Doughnut on the Deal Action Lab. Somebody's developed a way to look at your personal Doughnut. So for me, it depends on how big a conversation you want to start. And you'll see in those 9 steps in the slides that'll be shared, you'll see in those 9 steps that one of them is starting small projects. That's in the first 3 steps. So I don't think anything is too small. Sometimes I think we have to start small and build out that capacity, right? Start with what you're interested in and what you're prepared to get into action on. I mean, one of the things that I find is people come towards me and they're like, I have this great idea, here you go. And my thing is, the Doughnut is invitational. It's about inviting you to get into action. It's about inviting you to embrace that, learn more about it, and then open the space, start the conversation. So if you think FENIT is too small, I'd want to know why you think that's too small. Sometimes you can achieve, like this festival is a prime example of what you can achieve with a small group of people. So for me, like coming today, I was like, oh, if I thought we could have done this, this and this at the festival, maybe that's something that happens between now and next year. And maybe FENIT opens up a bigger conversation about Doughnut economics next year. That's the challenge, Keith, right? You two can keep him on that. All right, I'll just take one more question because I'm kind of conscious there's probably more happening in the barn. If there's any more questions? Sure.
Hi, Roisin. A very uninformed question. You mentioned sort of starting with the idea of people having a good life. Now, that's a very personal sort of a statement, really, because someone living in a third world country lifestyle is very different to the top 1%, which we are in the world, you know. So I got stuck at that stage because I see the huge inequalities and how do we, I suppose, get to move out of the system that we're in, you know. Thanks.
And I did caveat that by saying it depends who defines what a good life is, right? So I think that's a local question. You're right, it is very personal. And it comes down to values. It comes down to your personal values. But in a place like Doughnut, where people come to live and they live near the land and the sea, there's probably there's different value systems and a different scale. So you come together and ye decide what that value system is. And there will be people who disagree with each other. And what we have to learn to do as a society is disagree with each other, have a good discussion and move on. But ultimately, we have to stop this ecological disaster that we're in and this overconsumption model that we find ourselves in. It's a compelling argument that for the rest of the year, Ireland has already used up all its natural resources. So we have to start moving past what we think is a good life in that 1% model. That's not a good life because it costs the earth. It literally is costing the earth. So that is something that we have to move away from. And we all have a responsibility to move away from that. So me, where I live in North Wexford, in my life, I work remotely. I'm often found at my desk looking out the window. I have a responsibility of how I own that and how I am in the world as my personal infrastructure, how I connect to my local infrastructure in my local village, and how I connect to my county infrastructure and my national infrastructure. I have a responsibility to use my public voice when the next time it comes around, as Duncan said last night, to vote for politicians. And if there's no politicians who I want to vote for, then I need to create a situation where I will find somebody to vote for or address what those shortfalls are within our political system. And that's really challenging to find ourselves in, right? But we have to take responsibility for where we are, how we find ourselves. And we can always say, oh, there's a big system. How do I engage with that? And my theory is we start with ourselves as a small system and we dynamically interact with our family, our community. We create communities of interest within the places that we live in. How did the Greenway get there? People were engaged and passionate and got into action and fought for that. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole lot about people having a home, having a good life in Doughnut, wanting to live here or wanting to live in camp, as opposed to being pulled into a sort of a centre of Tralee, of the town. There's many questions there about accessing, some sort of house for the future and a steady livelihood and enough economics there to live in a means which is relatively substantial. But I think there's lots of conversations,
And that's where we start, right? We make the conversations, we make the space for the conversations, and we literally, like this, make the space. We step into it, we invite other people into that space, and we talk about it, and we set up a project, and we get into action, and then we move on again, and we bring people with us. And the people who are in that shortfall, they're the people to bring with us most critically. So they're the people who aren't in this room, people who aren't here. Where's their voice? Who's listening to their voice? They're really important factors as well.
So thanks very much to Roisin.